Okay, and Walker, did we make it all the way through the Boston Massacre? Sorry, I thought you were the one who said that's as far as we made it. Okay, that was okay. I thought maybe I was asking the wrong person. Okay, so if we got all the way through that, then we are ready to pick up with the committees of correspondence, which sounds maybe just like a club for pen pals, but what these were, they are communicating by correspondence, but they are, in fact, you can think of them as cells or networks of organized resistance against the British. They were started by Sam Adams, who will also be part of the Boston Tea Party of 1773. All right, some of the stuff we know about the Boston Tea Party, so a lot of this will be a refresher. A group of men disguised as Native Americans boarded 3 cargo ships loaded with tea in the Boston harbor. They busted up the cargo, and they dumped the tea into the harbor. This event is typically portrayed as an anti-tax protest by the colonists. And colonists were angry about the tea taxes. But the actual culprits of the Boston Tea Party were smugglers, including Sam Adams, who we've already met, and the man who will be the president of Continental Congress, John Hancock. And what they are angry about is some changes in British policy that are kind of fiddly, and we won't really get into them. The punchline is this: they made legal tea cheaper than tea that could be bought on the black market. And if you guys have any awareness of how black markets often work, this kind of sounds backwards. Okay, we would expect that things are more expensive because we're buying them on the black market, and the person selling them to us has the risk of being caught. That's not the right way to think about the black market here. The way to think about the black market here is much more like the smuggling of cigarettes into Canada. Cigarettes in Canada are just prohibitively expensive because the government wants them to be prohibitively expensive. And they want to push people away from smoking cigarettes. For that reason, the price difference between cigarettes sold in the United States and cigarettes sold in Canada is huge. So a lot of people try and smuggle cigarettes into Canada. They sell them for more than they buy them in the United States, but substantially less than people in Canada could buy them at a store. It was the same situation with tea. Black market tea, because it was not taxed as much as legal tea, tended to be less expensive. But now all of a sudden that is flipped, and the legal tea is cheaper than the stuff you can buy from the smugglers, and which means their profits are being cut. For the smugglers, the battle cry of no taxation without representation was a cover story. And none of this is secret information. If you go to the website of the Historical Society for the Boston Tea Party, they will tell you the same thing. A lot of where this really fits in, especially for the smugglers, would be more in line with the resentment against mercantilist policies more than anything else. And then second, as we move forward to 1774, colonists are outraged over what are called either the intolerable or somewhat less common, the coercive acts. These were 4 laws by the UK government to punish the colonists, mostly for the Boston Tea Party. The Boston Port Act imposed a Royal Navy blockade on Boston Harbor until someone had paid restitution for the loss of tea during the Boston Tea Party. There was also the Massachusetts Government Act. This replaced all of the colonial legislature with royal appointees. And it installed other royal appointees over the judicial system in the colonies, including down to the level of juries. So, the crown is influencing. They already had the governor as a royal appointee, but now they're replacing everything else with royal appointees. And to keep the colonists from organizing, by law, town meetings could only happen once a year, unless you had royal permission. And part of the reason for taking over the judicial system and the juries is the crown is aware, and the parliament are aware, that with so many colonists angry at the UK government, it's increasingly less likely that juries selected randomly from the population will convict people for crimes against the UK government. And we'll see that reinforced as we look at the other 2. Especially the one that's very next, the Administration of Justice Act. And this gave the royal governor of Massachusetts the power to move trials either to other colonies or even to move them to the United Kingdom. And the goal here, from the perspective of the UK government, was to ensure impartial trials. That is not at all how the colonists saw it. The colonists instead saw this as something that denied them Magna Carta's guarantee that if you were accused of a crime, you were entitled to a jury of your peers. The colonists argued people in other colonies are not your peers. People in the United Kingdom are certainly not your peers. So both sides expect that there will be a bias against them depending on who makes up the jury and where trials are held. And then the 4th Punitive Act, this is the only one that is applying to all of the colonies and not specific to Massachusetts. Based on the 3rd Amendment to our own Constitution, we would think that during this time period, the British were quartering the Redcoats or UK troops in people's houses. So making people like Iris, you've got to, you're going to have to move the kids all into one bedroom because you're going to have soldiers living in your house. That really wasn't how that worked. They looked for houses that weren't inhabited. They used outbuildings ranging from barns to outhouses. Anywhere that they could put troops. So they are not, right, we're not talking about in colonist homes, which again is what the 3rd Amendment would make us think is going on. When we prohibit the government from requiring us to quarter soldiers in our homes during times of peace. But they did require that the colonists pay the expenses of housing the troops. Which is part of how these become seen as the intolerable acts. The idea that the colonists should have to pay to house soldiers that they see as being sent there to suppress them and violate their rights makes them absolutely furious. And the intolerable acts inspire the first of two Continental Congresses. They meet in Philadelphia at Carpenter's Hall. 12 of the 13 colonies send delegates. Georgia's not in it. Remember, Georgia is the youngest of the colonies, being founded only in 1733. We're not going to list all of them, but on the list are some of the who's who of founding fathers. But many at this time are not even close to thinking about how we're going to set up the government for an independent United States. Many of them openly oppose the idea that the colonies should seek independence. They were hopeful that there would be some compromise. It's easy to lose sight of it, given what we've been learning the last couple of class periods, but until very close to this time period, the idea of independence is just kind of openly laughed at, right, or shrugged off as an idea by people including George Washington. They can't imagine that the colonies would seek independence. So what they do instead is send a declaration of resolve, sometimes called the Declaration of Rights, to King George III. And it is specifically to King George III. And there they are asserting that the colonists have rights as Britons. They were careful in their language. So everything about this is tailored to achieve a specific purpose with the king. They claim that they are the natural-born subjects of the king. This is a Hobbesian term. They are asserting that being born into an existing social contract between the British people and the king, the sovereign, they are his subjects. And what they're doing is, again, they send this to the king for a reason. They are appealing to the king to help them against what they see as a hostile parliament. And they think there's hope that they can bring the king onto their side. And that because at this time the king is still powerful, that the king can get rid of the intolerable acts. That's what goes to the king. For domestic consumption, the Congress also calls for a boycott of British goods in all of the colonies. And they set up local committees to enforce the boycott. And even though Georgia is not there, within months, all 13 of the colonies approve the Declaration of Rights and also the call for a colonies-wide boycott. And then finally, we are to independence. There is a follow-up Continental Congress. The king rejects the Declaration of Rights. The government of the United Kingdom becomes more repressive in the colonies. And just as a matter of reality on the ground, the War for Independence, or the Revolutionary War, has already started. In April of 1775, we have the battles of Lexington and Concord, fought between colonials and British regulars. This Congress gets delegates from all 13 colonies. And it is, put it there in asterisks because this is important, especially important. This is de facto, not in law, but de facto it is the first national government from the colonies. And that role evolves from the early meetings of the Congress. It's not something they just decided on the first day. But it will last until 1781 when the Articles of Confederation come into force. This government is legislative and executive all rolled into one. It's not the same as a fusion of powers in a parliamentary system like the UK. There's no prime minister. There's a president of the Congress, but I don't want you to confuse what it was. It's like I said, it's kind of a government that evolves out of the situation. They begin, not 1755. Make sure you write that as 1775. I will get that fixed. As a matter of fact, before I could even possibly forget. So, almost exactly a year before the Declaration of Independence, the Congress tries one more time to reach out to the king. This is what's called the Olive Branch Petition. And it essentially is kind of a recapitulation of the Declaration of Rights. It says, look, we are loyal to you as the king. We have rights as British subjects to the king. But that doesn't go anywhere. Skip ahead quite a ways. On the 7th of June in 1776, Henry Lee, a delegate from Virginia, openly calls for the Congress to declare independence. I know I'm throwing a lot of specific dates at you. Remember, my emphasis is not on you memorizing specific dates, but I do want you to kind of understand how quickly things start to happen. The Continental Congress appoints a committee to draft a declaration. I don't expect you to memorize who all is on this committee, but I do want you to at least be able to see who's on it. One name, Thomas Jefferson, is going to be the most crucial of those. We also have John Adams, Ben Franklin, and then two lesser-known figures, Robert Livingston and Roger Sherman. Jefferson is the author of the Declaration of Independence. And as we're going to see when we look at it in more detail tomorrow, the Declaration of Independence is very much influenced by John Locke's philosophy. Once it's written, the Declaration of Independence is debated in the Congress, and there are some changes that are made before it's passed. One, Thomas Jefferson had been critical of the English people as a whole, and a lot of the delegates saw this as just overly harsh, since the dispute between the colonists and the British was really a dispute between the colonists, the king, and Parliament on the other side. The Declaration also dropped a condemnation of slavery, which was needed in order to bring on the support of the southern colonies. And Jefferson himself is a slave owner. Of course, as we remember every 4th of July, that is when the Declaration of Independence was approved. So from the time of Henry Lee's call for independence to the actual declaration, we have just under a month. And we are going to skip from this over the war itself and pick up with the Articles of Confederation. And so if you are finished with the notes, you can head back to Canvas. As I said, tomorrow we are going to look at the Declaration of Independence, and we're going to compare it with writings by John Locke. For Wednesday, I need you to have read about the Articles of Confederation. This is a pretty short reading, and instead of it being in Canvas, I'm just going to give you a paper copy of the text. If you need to take notes, there are key terms listed on page 55. You should write out definitions of those terms. You should take notes over the structure of the government laid out by the Articles of Confederation. How it is that delegates to the Congress were selected. How states' representation was apportioned, which means how was the number of representatives for each state determined, population, tax contributions, the weaknesses of the Articles, and the kinds of problems that were suffered by the United States in the 1780s. All right, that's going to help us understand why we pretty quickly go from the Articles of Confederation to replacing it with our current U.S. Constitution. Okay, this gives you a few minutes to start work on that reading and notes. Again, you don't need to have that finished until the 18th. So tomorrow we're going to look at the Declaration of Independence itself. All right, unless there are questions, please get started.